Well, welcome to our last session in the marriage track of the 40 Days of Family campaign. And I hope that two things have happened during this study. First, I hope that you found ways to strengthen your own marriage, and just by understanding God's purpose for marriage and God's plan for marriage, and just really what God's Word says about marriage. But secondly, I hope that you have found some really good friends. I hope you've made great friends, because that's the best part of the small group, is that you get to meet new people and you get to do life with these people. You share similar experiences, and you can pray for each other. You can support each other. So that's a great thing. If you walk away from this with new friends and a group that you can depend on, that's an awesome thing. We need the benefit of other people's love and encouragement and experience if we're going to grow as believers. So after this lesson, take a few minutes to talk about what your next step is, especially if this is like a brand new group. It doesn't have to end after tonight. You can keep this group going. And so, it might look a little different. It might be at somebody else's house. It might be in a different location or something. Somebody else might be leading. But talk about what the possibilities of your next step and see if you can make that happen. And if you choose to continue in some form, just let us know, and we'll give you what you need to make that happen. We'll equip you to keep that group going. Now, this last lesson is probably the most important lesson, because if you've been taking what we've been learning in the first four lessons and applying them to your life and applying them to your marriage, that means one thing. You now have a target on your back, because Satan wants you to fail. Satan wants your marriage to end. Satan wants your marriage to fall apart. And so anytime you take steps in the right direction, Satan wants to screw that up. So there's a target on your back. So because there is, Satan's going to tempt you. Satan is going to give you reasons to fall and fail. So you need to set up certain guardrails in your marriage to keep you on the right track. For instance, just think about Samson. You remember his story. Samson was not the best influence, not the best example of what a man of God should be. But one thing about Samson is that, God had high standards for him. He was a Nazirite. He took the Nazirite vow, so there were certain things he could not do. So God set a higher standard so that he would be less tempted. For instance, Samson was not supposed to consume alcohol. So that was the standard, but God made higher standards so that he would not be tempted. For instance, he couldn't eat grapes. He couldn't go in a vineyard. He couldn't even eat raisins or use vinegar. Anything made from a grape, he had to stay away from, not because those things were bad, but because he was supposed to stay away from alcohol. So God set a higher standard. God set a higher guardrail to protect him from temptation. And so we need to do the same thing with our marriage. We need to set high standards, narrow guardrails to help protect us from that kind of temptation. So I want to give you two broad categories of guardrails, and we're going to talk about them. The first are guardrails of transparency, and the second are guardrails of integrity. Let's talk about guardrails of transparency first. When I say you need to set up guardrails of transparency, that means that you should not hide anything from your spouse. You need to have an all-access kind of relationship, and primarily in three areas. Those three areas are geographically, digitally, and financially. Geographically, your husband or your wife should pretty much know where you are all the time. They should know where you are all the time. Wherever you go, you should be accountable to your spouse, especially if you travel a lot. If you travel a lot, you should be accountable to your spouse. Temptation happens when you're alone, things like that. So be accountable geographically. If you're on a business trip, or men, you're going on a fishing trip. Ladies, you're going on a girls' weekend or something. It's no big deal just to text and say, hey, we're headed here. Hey, we're going here. Hey, we're done fishing. We're on our way home. It's no big deal to do that. And just letting them know where you are, it gives you some accountability, protects you from temptation, and it gives them some peace of mind, even if it's just knowing that you're safe. And then second, you need to have digital transparency. Okay, we need to face the fact that our biggest source of temptation is in our pockets right now, and we have access to it all the time. That's the reality of it. So we need digital transparency. In recent years, as I've done marriage counseling, anytime there's like a catastrophic event in a marriage that ruins the marriage or whatever, the phone is always involved. It's always a part of it. So, and social media, those things are always a part of these terrible events. So we need accountability with that. So, we should not hide passwords and pins in these different apps and things. There shouldn't be any hidden apps. Our spouse should have full access to our phone. And, so if you're going to have total transparency, it's got to be on phones and computers and iPads and everything. So share all of that stuff. And, maybe you're thinking, well, I've got a work phone and nobody's supposed to be on that. It's Washington, D.C. I've got a clearance, blah, 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 blah. And maybe that's true, but probably there are things on that phone that protect you. I would think they have some software that protects you from certain temptations. But if they don't, maybe if your spouse can't have access to that stuff, maybe somebody at work needs to do that. You need to submit yourself to someone and say, hey, just for my peace of mind and to protect me, let's be accountable together on this. We can find a Christian brother that you work with and be accountable with them. There are ways to do that. And so just that's a suggestion. Be accountable to somebody that does have access to that phone. So the third guardrail is financial transparency. However your finances are set up, however you chose to do that, your spouse should have eyes on everything. There should not be any secret accounts, any accounts with money that the spouse doesn't know where it's going. You should have total transparency in that. And again, you do that for your own protection. You're not, if your spouse has eyes on that money, you're not going to be tempted, or you're going to be less tempted, and they're going to have peace of mind. So set up those guardrails financially so that you're protecting yourself from that temptation. So there's also guardrails of integrity. And these guardrails, the guardrails of transparency have to do with things that husband and wife can see. Guardrails of integrity have things to do with only you can see, Only you have access to those things. Only you have control over that. A great example of that is Billy Graham. Billy Graham was a minister for over 50 years, evangelist, traveled all over the world, every continent over a span of 50 years. And in that 50 years, not one single time was Billy Graham alone in a place with another woman. Not one single time. Other than his wife and his daughters and his mom, he was never alone, never in a room alone with another one. He was not even in an elevator alone with a woman. If he was on an elevator and the door opened and a woman walked on, he walked off and would catch the next elevator. That's a great standard. That the temptation comes in times like that, in moments like that, when you're alone with someone else. So just make it a standard. You're not going to be alone with someone with a member of the opposite sex. That's just a good standard to do. If you have meetings at work and stuff, do it in a transparent place at the office. Don't meet behind closed doors. Don't tell me it's just a business lunch. Don't tell me that, because there's a whole dating site, or maybe it's a hookup site called It's Just Lunch. So don't tell me it's just a business lunch. If you have to have a business lunch with a member of the opposite sex, invite your spouse to go along, invite somebody else from the office, but don't do it alone, because that'll protect you from temptation and it'll give your spouse peace of mind. You also need to avoid places and other people. That's a guardrail you might need to set up. There may be people in your life that aren't interested in helping you make the right decisions, and they're gonna tempt you and lead you down a path that maybe you would have gone down a long time ago. But that might be a guardrail that you set up, that you don't hang out with those people anymore, and places that you go that might provide a certain amount of temptation to you. You just need to say, a matter of integrity, I'm not going there anymore. So set up those guardrails of integrity and let your spouse know, here's the standard I've set. This is what I've chosen to do. Now, single people, you are not excused from this. You still need to set up guardrails. If you're here in this marriage group and you're single and you're here because you want to prepare for marriage, that's an awesome thing. But you need to set up guardrails now, because you're vulnerable to temptation now. And if you're committed to being in a godly relationship with someone and to protect your purity and their purity until you're married, then you need guardrails. And so you need the same guardrails that married people have. You need the guardrails of transparency, and you need to do that with your location. Make sure somebody in your family knows where you are at all times to help keep you from temptation, and that'll give them peace of mind, especially if it's like your mom and dad, they want to know where you are. That gives them peace of mind. Digitally, you can partner with somebody else, somebody in this small group, a close Christian friend or family member, and partner with them so you have some digital accountability. Financial accountability, you can just kind of make that, let someone else have eyes on your finances from time to time so that you protects yourself from that temptation. But you also need to set up guardrails of integrity. You need the same ones. The scripture is very clear that if you're a Christian person and you plan to get married, you should only marry a Christian person who is committed to following Jesus. Just because somebody's on a Christian dating site doesn't mean they're committed to following Jesus. It doesn't even mean they're a Christian. But just because they're on a Christian dating site or just because they say they're a Christian doesn't mean they're committed to it. You need to determine in your heart, you need to set up the guardrail that says, I'm going to date Christian men, Christian women that are committed to following Jesus. Because you want them to have the same goals and the same trajectory in life that you do. So if you're going to date, you need to date only believers. The Bible tells us that. It says, do not be unequally yoked. I had a student pastor many, many years ago who used to say, every date is a potential mate. And that's absolutely true. Everybody you go out with could end up being your husband or wife. That's just the way it is. So that's why it's important that you set up a guardrail that says, I'm only going to date committed Christians. Number two, who you hang out with is important. You may need to set up those kind of guardrails. Paul said that bad company corrupts good morals. So if you're hanging out with the wrong person, that's going to affect you. It's going to affect you. It's going to tempt you. And some people you hang out with may not have your best interest in mind, and they may have no problem watching you compromise biblical standards. Okay? If that's the case, then you set up a guardrail that says, I can't hang out with that person. And then also set up guardrails as to where you go. Not every place that single people go is good for a godly Christian single person who is preparing for marriage. You need to be careful of those things too. You need to stay away from places that are known for temptation. And I can't say this from experience because I've never been to a club, but I don't think the club scene is a place for any Christian to go. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it kind of looks like their whole operation is designed to tempt you with alcohol and sex so that you'll spend more money there. That's not a good place for you to be. They don't have your best interest in mind. So you should set up guardrails that you're not going to go to places like that. You're going to go to places where God is honored, and you're going to go with people who want to honor God. And you need to set up those kind of guardrails in your life. So spend the next few minutes together talking about guardrails. Maybe you've been married a while and you've already set up these kind of guardrails. That's great. The younger people in your group need to hear about that. They need to hear your experience with it. And if you're new to this and you're just setting up guardrails, talk about them. Talk about ones that you think you should set up, ones that you need, and maybe you can even set up some accountability with the people in your group. That would be an awesome thing. That's one of the good things about small groups is you have that measure of accountability. So talk about guardrails, get your Bibles and your study guides, and don't forget, talk about your next steps with this group. What do you want to do when this study is over? So get your Bibles, study guides. Have an awesome time on this last study in the marriage track of 40 Days of Family. Thank you guys so much.